So when we're drawing with a drawing tablet, the process of transcribing our image is made a lot easier. Obviously we can move from point to point. Fairly quickly. And of course, if you're drawing, one of the key things to think about is whether or not you can see the line that you've been drawing. We've actually drawn a line, but because we had no stroke selected, our line is invisible. So it's always useful to begin with the idea of a sort of basic setting. So let's just give the idea of a black stroke colour and a 1 point stroke. It's always worth remembering that everything that we do can be modified a bit later on. The key thing we need to be careful of is if we start to click on anchor points that we've already made. What you can see happening is that when we do that, we are deleting anchor points. Once we start to become familiar with the pen tool, we can start to draw with it in a much more kind of liberal way, working fairly quickly. We can decide whether we're drawing a series of straight lines or a series of curved ones. Remember that everything that we draw can be re-edited later on, so if we get things wrong, it's not going to matter. The important thing to also understand is that when we're drawing in this sort of way, we need to be mindful of what we're drawing over. To that extent, when I come back and close the shape, when I hover over a point, you can see that the anchor point, the pen tool changes to a minus sign, which means that if I hit that point, I delete anchor points. So we need to be careful as we're building shapes up. So it's not a bad idea to create a shape, then thinking about filling that shape. So I'm just going to fill that shape now. And then again, I'm going to lock that shape. So Command 2. Obviously, I could now start to work over the top of that. So again, I'm just going to remove the fill just so it makes it easier for me to know where I've been. And I can start to build up another set of shapes here. And once I've made those shapes, I'm going to remove my stroke. Sometimes you can kind of work with the fill. And obviously when you're filling a shape, you can decide whether that shape is a solid shape or a semi-transparent shape. Once you've blocked in the large areas, you can now start to work over the top of your illustration with the brush tool or the blob brush tool. Essentially, when you click on the brush, obviously you can choose, when you click on here, whether you have touch sensitivity set up with your drawing tablet. So that gives you the variation of mark of scale. Again, now that you're working with colour, you can modify your colour and you can modify the size of your brush. You can decide whether you're working opaquely or transparently. Obviously, again, if you're unhappy with a particular colour that you've chosen, you can modify that colour. So everything that you've done can be revisited. What can also be really useful for the moment is, particularly when we're working on maybe this head area, is I could now click and drag over all of these shapes. And then I could move those shapes. Let me just go Command and Z for the moment. Obviously what I've done there is I've locked all of my initial shapes. So I'm going to go Select All, Object and Unlock All. Now I'm going to click and drag over this and I'm going to group those together. Now I can move the whole lot into here. I can now zoom in. Now I can start to work So what's happening here is that I want to make sure that I've got a slightly smaller brush setting. Let's remove that. Go back to that smaller one. Of course, we can also choose different brushes, and we have obviously a degree of control over how we think about those brushes, how we can manipulate them. We can also go down here to choose different brush options. So when we come down to artistic and calligraphic brushes, we have again different choices of brush that we can use, each of which produces different kinds of mark. Can also create our own brushes. When we double click on an image, of course, we can modify the size of that particular brush, and we can apply that to the strokes that we've just made. Remember that we need to have the pressure settings set for us to have touch sensitivity. It's also worth remembering that it can be very easy, particularly when you're drawing freehand, to get the scale of things wrong. In this instance, this whole head is wrongly scaled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this image to one side. I'm going to click and drag over that, hold the shift key down, and then I can rescale that head. Once I'm happy with that, I can put that head back on top of my body. Until I'm happy with the image. I'll also work into this image with a different brush. Make sure I've got the right colour. And of course, I can think about adding background content. If I go to the fill option here and I fill this with a colour, of course I've covered up the image because that's the last layer that I've added. So if I right click, I can send that image to the back, and that then becomes a background for my illustration.